Today is July 3rd, 2026, and I am going to be talking about the 8 books that I am reading. There will be spoilers, and I will try to say right before I start talking about any book that I'm going to be spoiling, I will say spoiler warning. These are the 8 books. Today I'll be talking about East of Eden, Kuan, Boredom by Alberto, Moravia, and Existential Counseling and Psychotherapy by Emmy van Duerzen. So let's start with East of Eden. I'm about 75% of the way through East of Eden, and this is going to be a spoiler, is that East of Eden has really been a relationship across generations. So we see the relationship between Charles and Adam when they're kids and they're being raised by Cyrus. Then we get to see a deep dive into the relationship of Kathy and Adam when they move out to California together, and they then the Samuel Hamiltons, like the rest of the Hamilton family, and we get to see the multi-generational kind of relationships form between these two families and how they kind of connect to each other. Aaron and Cal, Lee. Right now, where I am in the book is that Aaron and Cal are late high schoolers, early college. Aaron is in college at Stanford. He skipped a year in high school, and Cal is kind of finishing up high school and deciding what he wants to do with his life. He kind of wants to take over Adam's ranch. I find that where I am in the book right now, these two boys, Aaron and Cal, have basically become the stress points of all of the morality and lessons that the older generations didn't fully learn. So it's like kind of on them to be able to transcend the generational trauma that they are inheriting from their mother, Kathy, and their father, Adam, but also kind of the lessons from Lee and Samuel, and even Liza and Olive Hamilton. John Steinbeck is just so good with his turns of phrase. Moving over to Kuan, let's do that one next. The Grand Master's Thoughts. I've just finished the chapter about Islamic extremism and the chapter about India and the future of India. And what made Kuan so impressive was just his ability to be extremely precise and pragmatic at almost a chess level of understanding human nature at the political level. And I think that he talks about India's problems largely being tied to their caste system and their kind of unwillingness to kind of let that go. He also talks about India's rising importance as a country in the SEA, the Southeast Asia landscape, in terms of how it serves as a kind of a bulwark between China's interests and the U.S. interests in terms of its proximity to the Indian Ocean. This book was written in the mid-2000s, or these interviews were given in the mid-2000s, I think. So there's, not a lot of talk of the kind of current Prime Minister of India, but there is a kind of discussion of what India's strengths are in terms of education, but also its very deep weaknesses that it needs to solve. Moving over to Islamic extremism, there was this was kind of 2004 that these interviews were happening, so this was pretty much right after 9/11, and Kuan was discussing how moderate Muslims, the people who aren't on the kind of jihadism track, need to be the main leader in pulling back Islamic thought into something that's a little less destructive. He was describing that radical Islamism is unique in history because there hasn't been a group in history that has been so dead set on destroying itself as long as it destroys others. I don't really fully agree with that. I think that the Crusades were something similar, like any kind of martyrdom experience in history, where the Flying Tigers, where people will kind of die for something that they believe is greater, but usually it's a form of government. In this case, it's a religion, and I think that the modern kind of way that these kind of terrorist cells work is that they are very much a fly in a china shop where they just sting the back of a bull, which is a huge country like the United States, for example, and cause it to go wild. But I thought that was particularly interesting, especially how things have played out after his interview. He was talking specifically about what the killing of Osama bin Laden would accomplish, and kind of if the U.S. would be able to achieve some kind of stasis with the Middle East, and what pulling out of Iraq would mean. Obviously, both of those things have happened in the interim between those interviews and now, but the relations of the Middle East haven't really evolved that significantly, it feels, in the past 20 years since these interviews were given. Boredom by Alberto Moravia. Here's going to be some more spoilers. So he just met Cecilia. Well, actually, no, he left his mother's castle because he's rich, and he has some really interesting thoughts on being rich, where he's like, he wants to LARP being poor, basically, but he knows that he can never truly do it successfully because he always has a rich person's home to go back to. It's never really stated where his mother's money comes from. But he's off in his own artist studio, but he's not painting. He's just basically just staring at walls and being miserable and being bored all the time. And there's this 17-ish-year-old named Cecilia who is sleeping with this old artist who falls in love with her and then dies of a heart attack. And then she kind of shacks with him, and he's really inquisitive, so he'll just pepper people with questions, and he does it for his own kind of self-satisfaction. He does it with his mother, he does it with Cecilia, where he kind of just continues to do an inquisition against them until they give him what he deems a satisfactory answer, which is a very kind of, to his own feeling of like satisfaction, and it never solves his boredom. It just makes people think worse of him in his life, but they're for some reason still obsessed with him, his mother and Cecilia, as it were. And he pulled this kind of cruel move against Cecilia, where when he was a child, he was describing how he would take a cat that was running towards its meal, and then right before it got there, he would pick it up and like move it back to the other side of the room and do it over and over, until the cat like looked at him and was like, "Bro, what are you doing?" And he was like, "Oh man, I feel so bad." So he did something similar with Cecilia, where they were trying to sleep together or make love, I suppose, and he kept telling her to get up and do random chores. And that would really start to sink into her. She's like, "Is there anything else that you need me to do before I lie down here?" And he's like, No, it's totally going to be fine. And then he would send her off on another task. And I think that that's going to be an interesting direction for the rest of the book. I guess I'll find out. But like, how does he deal with his boredom? And does his boredom basically result in a kind of sadism being born within his character? And how far will he follow that to try and rebuild his relationship to reality and cure himself of his boredom? Finally, I want to talk about Existential Counseling and Psychotherapy by Emmy van Duerzen. Just a great book. I mean, the illustrations can kind of be a bit long in the tooth. I've never really been a fan of illustrations of fictional, semi-fictional people where it kind of describes a story of their life and then how the book has solved that particular problem that they have. I think it's a very natural thing to do in nonfiction books, especially when you need to do case studies to prove out ideologies and stuff like that. But I just find that they can kind of be a bit too long and not kind of just like testimonially. But the core function of the book, specifically right now, I'm kind of pulling in towards the conclusion, is kind of wrapping up how people deal with their identities and the circles of our identities, and kind of how we can deal with the anxieties and insecurities of life. Specifically in this latest chapter, it's been talking about our relationship, the I-you relationship versus the I-it relationship. So I-it is a transactional relationship that you have with like a cashier, for example, or someone who is going to give you something, and there might be just general politeness, but there's no actual depth into the human relationship. Whereas I-you is a much more kind of like, I need you to know about me and you need to know about me. Wait, I need you to know about me and I need to know about you. And then the I-me relationship is when you get to that top level of intimacy, at that level of like almost sexual intimacy, where you start to shed the barrier between two people and try and become one, even if it's just for a moment. I thought that was kind of interesting. I also found it really interesting the fact that meaning is a single person journey and that it's worth giving, like life is more worth living if you are willing to give up security in the pursuit of something that gives you a deeper meaning that you decide for yourself in the absurdity. So she brings up a lot of Camus, she brings up a lot of Sartre, she brings up a lot of the fact that, suffering and anxiety are an inevitable process of life, and that choosing meaning is the thing that matters. It's the only thing that will give your life coherence and consistency, and everything else is just window painting, specifically the kind of habits that we undergo that are made to make our lives more secure, the jobs that we think and statuses that we attach ourselves to. And the purpose of existential counseling is to kind of help people use Socratic reasoning to find what this deep meaning is from the actions that they've undertaken in their lives, and then use that to become better.